Okay, cool. We're recording. Okay, hi, that's me. I'm also me. So I'm Chen. I am currently an assistant professor of psychology over at Long Beach City College, which is about 40 minutes from here. Not super far, but I live in LA, so it's always far. I'm gonna go into kind of a little bit about how I got here. But this is really just my second year as an assistant professor at Long Beach City College. Last year was my first year, and the year before that, I was part-time here at LBCC, but more on that in just a second. Okay, first up, educational journey. I'm gonna minimize this just so other people in the room can see that. I'm an ant here, so I was at UCI for all 4 years of my undergrad. So I did not go to community college, unfortunately, but I did go to UCI for all 4 years. So I got my bachelor's in psychology and at the same time also in educational science, which is not exactly the same as education because we wanted it to be scientific, which just means that we were a lot more interested in doing educational research, which means things like, hey, how can we get kids to have more learning within a classroom? How can we get kids to like school more? How can we improve teacher pedagogy to make sure that they actually are doing a really good job in the classroom, not making kids cry, that kind of thing. After that, I had about a gap year after 2016. I was working on like after school programs. I was also a volunteer at this place called Karate for All. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Karate for All. If you've never heard of it before, it's in Tustin. It's a pediatric therapy clinic that does speech and language therapy, physical therapy, and occupational therapy. All really cool forms of therapy, all really cool, well, except for maybe physical therapy, but both speech, language, and occupational therapy are really cool pathways that students in psychology can take within the future. You do have to take some other prereqs in addition to stuff that you would normally do for your psych degree, but they're very, very rewarding and fulfilling jobs, and they pay pretty nice too. Not that being a professor doesn't pay very nice, but not a lot of people want to be a professor. So you guys want to do something a little more practical. So after that year of doing volunteer work and working in after school programs, I started my PhD, which lasted too long, lasted 5 years. I was at UCI for that entire period. So that was like almost a decade of my life in the same school. You don't have to do that. And I advise you, don't do that if you absolutely don't have to. Where I got my PhD in education. But at the same time, that education degree meant that I could do research in education, stuff that I kind of described to you earlier, but my specific area of interest, or I guess our specialization for our school, was human development. So how people grow up, specifically within schools. And for my specific research area, I'll focus on kind of 3 general topics that I could talk on and on forever about, but I'm just going to briefly describe them to you right now. Mathematical cognition, which anybody know what that means or sounds like? Any guesses of what that might mean? What does cognition mean? If you can remember what that means from your psych classes. That's right. That's everything that you were just doing right now when I asked you what that meant. It means thinking. So what does mathematical thinking sound like? Thinking about math. Good. You guys are great. It's thinking about math. So it's thinking about how do I solve math problems? If I present a word problem to a kid, do they freak out? Or what do they actually go through within their heads to solve the math problem? Do they picture different items in their head if they're trying to quantify things? Where do they place the numbers in their head? If I ask you right now, 16 times 5. And then in your head, I'm going to guess you did 16, 5, multiplication, this, and then did 0, 8. And I just did all that mirrored. So that felt pretty good in my working memory just now. So that's what mathematical cognition is like. How do kids solve problems? And at the same time, what makes doing math difficult for kids to do? Could be a lot of different reasons. The one I looked at was memory. So if you've taken your Psych 1 classes, or if you've taken, do you still have that like slightly advanced psych intro class?
Principles of psychology.
Principles of psychology, do we still have that?
Yes, I believe it's the last semester.
Okay. Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Do we still have psychology of learning?
We do.
Okay. So do you all heard of short-term memory? How about working memory? Okay, good. So working memory was my primary area of research. I did all my research on working memory. So how does it work? How can we improve somebody's working memory, not capacity, because there's no way to increase the capacity, but how do we increase their efficiency in using the space? And I mostly did that through different kind of multitasking experiments. So I just forced a bunch of college kids to do a bunch of computer tasks at the same time to see how well it kind of messes with their ability to remember stuff. And that kind of told me what kind of memory resources people were using when they were doing different things like arithmetic, which for me was really cool. For a lot of people, it's like, damn, you just put me through like 2.5 hours of doing multiplication and subtraction on a computer. What am I getting out of this? It was $30. So they got off pretty well. And then lastly, the last kind of area of ish that I do research in is online learning. So how do we make it so that students are engaged while they're on online platforms? Like if you're on Canvas and you have a really cruddy looking Canvas course page, your instructor doesn't really do a whole lot for your online class to make it enjoyable for you to be on there. You're kind of just like logging in, doing stuff, leaving, you don't really feel very engaged on there. How can we get you more engaged on there? How can we keep your mind from kind of wandering around and thinking about doing other stuff? And so that you might end up learning a little bit more. Bless you. If you scan that QR code, it will take you to my Google Scholar page where you can find all of my publications. So if you ever get bored for whatever reason and you want to read something that I wrote, right there. Okay. And that goes for everybody online as well. If you want to scan any of the stuff or scan that QR code right there, you can get taken to my old Google Scholar page. I have some like publications on there. Some people have cited me before. My favorite citation that I got from somebody was, I think, the German military, which was really cool. Somebody was writing like a instruction manual for training their soldiers, and they cited one of my papers in there, and I was like, that felt pretty cool. Too bad I don't get paid for it. Okay, now for like professional journey. So after I got my PhD in 2022, I was very, very fortunate. This doesn't happen for everybody. I was very fortunate to get a job right after graduating, which was an adjunct position teaching part-time here at OCC. It's actually thanks to Dr. Ferguson, because I was part of a mentorship program where PhD students at UCI get partnered with a faculty member at some community college that they want to work at to teach a class there. And I got to teach experimental methods. So for that 1 year that I was here, I was teaching research methods as well, which is my bread and butter, PhD. Yeah. So I taught research methods, I taught intro, and I taught psychology of learning, which, sorry, that one was my favorite. That one was my favorite. Then I only taught psych of learning for 1 spring semester, because that same spring semester that I taught it was my last semester here, because almost immediately after I got a full-time position with Long Beach, which from my understanding doesn't happen. Yeah.
It's pretty unheard of for being an adjunct 1 year and getting a full-time position.
Yeah.
But and I don't know, did the mentorship program help, like being part of that program, set a bunch of acronyms?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, California Community College Internship Program.
But I mean, most people I know that even were part of that, it still took them about 3 years to get a full-time position.
Yeah, and if they don't go through something cool or kind of guided like that, a lot of adjuncts are adjuncts either for a very long, extended period of time or basically forever. Like it's hard to jump from being a part-time instructor to being a full-time instructor. And it's okay if I talk about just briefly on the salary kind of difference. Okay, so I'm gonna give you just a brief rundown of like how much I got paid for teaching 1 class here, and then how that compares to how much a full-timer would make at like Long Beach. For I think 1 class that I taught here, and we're gonna use like I think experimental methods as the example, it was I think somewhere between 2.5 to 3K for that one class, for that one semester.
And that class was a lot of work.
It caused a lot of work. Like us setting it up, us teaching it, grading everything, that's a lot of work. I know it's a lot of work for you too, to take that class, but a lot of work for us to set it up as well. A lot of hours that we
Much more work than like a 100 or a 250 or like intro psych or bio psych or
Yeah.
principles of learning, unless your first semester.
So that was like, so 2.5 to like 3K for that one class. So a full-time load for instructors is roughly like 5 classes. So it's like 2.5 times 5. Sorry, I'm making you do more math. It's like 12.5. So you're making per semester about 12K as an adjunct for just like teaching 5 classes at once for one semester. That's not a whole lot. That's like pennies. And I made that joke with all my students that I just made pennies. Currently, a full-timer who has like a PhD, so it depends on like what educational level you're at, whether you're like master's with like some additional teaching experience or like a PhD. For a full-time load right now, if I were to just start off at the lowest possible pay scale with a PhD, so to go back for a second, so 12K, roughly 12K per semester, so think about like 24K for the entire year. For a full-timer teaching the same number of classes, it's around like 90 to 100 starting out if you have a PhD, and that's like exact same credentials and everything. So it's not amazing to be a part-timer forever. It's not very lucrative, and it's usually only something you do as either a stepping stone to get to a full-time, or if it's like a side hustle kind of thing. But it's not like, I won't say it's the most rewarding side hustle you can get into, but for a lot of people who want to get into teaching, it is a very fulfilling side hustle to get into.
And you make more each semester you teach too. So like,
Yes.
he was his first semester, first year teaching, so he was.
Oh yeah, I was bottom of the barrel.
So the more you teach, the more you make. And same thing even with being full-time tenure-track faculty, the same way, it's all based on contracts and things like that, so. Cause I wanna say, by the time I started teaching here, my 5 classes and I didn't teach 5 classes, for 12 years, most of it I taught 3 classes.
Yeah.
I think I made about 45,000 my last year. And then I also had, I didn't have full 12 years, it was part-time, but I had quite a bit of experience going in as tenure track, so I made a huge jump too.
Yeah.
It's nice, it's rewarding.
Yeah, it feels real good to be able to afford things like food and gas and living. So while we'll come back to that later if you have questions about it, but in addition to kind of teaching the classes, usually part-timers don't do this. Usually part-timers don't get involved with other campus business because they just teach and then they go home, which makes their job, it's actually pretty simple. But I wanted more, and I wanted the full time. Also, I was bored and I had a lot of time. So I participated in a lot of other stuff that was going on campus. So during the time that I was here, I was one of the co-advisors for this side data. And I was helping out with a couple of the national research projects at that time, which we got first place for during the year that I actually was here. So I'll have to take that with me. With that big win, and I'll show you the winners in a bit. I'm very proud of my students. A couple of them have transferred to like UCs and stuff, and some of them got scholarships. I'm very happy about that. And I've also served on the symposium committee, so I helped plan the symposium the year that I was here, which was also super rewarding and not totally the reason why my students won. There's no bias there.
There was.
Yeah, there wasn't, because there's independent evaluators. All right. So outside of that, after a very grueling interview process to get a full-time position, which are like, it's like finding a unicorn, and then getting the job is like convincing that unicorn to give you like, I don't know, hair from its mane. Oh, I'll come back to that. I got my job at Long Beach City College. So that's where I am right now, started full-time last year. teaching research methods and intro classes, but we're trying to start up some additional classes for the upcoming year. Because right now we are trying to get a stats class going. So I know within psych department here, there's a statistics for behavioral sciences. Don't have it anymore. I thought we did.
No, we didn't. You don't have.
No, we don't. We only have stats from the math department and they hate us. They like don't want us to have this class. But we need to have the class because other majors need a stats for behavioral sciences to transfer for a 4-year. So we're trying to get it going so that our other students outside of our major actually can do that. So we'll get there. And right now I'm co-advising for our psychology club, which we revived last year. I will be the future advisor for Psi Beta because we currently don't have a chapter at Long Beach. But as soon as the money goes through, then within the next month or so, we will have our new chapter and I will be the chapter advisor. I'm also a committee member for our online education committee. I've done research in online education and I think I know my stuff when it comes to that, but I'm always learning. And this year as well is our very first symposium for Long Beach. We've never had one before. I worked on it here at OCC and I was like, that's cool. I'm gonna steal that idea. We're gonna do it with us too, but better. So come visit us, come visit us the week after your symposium. It's actually gonna be a lot smaller because it's just gonna be the social sciences. So you're gonna have mostly psychology, anthro, soc, ethnic studies, history, political science, that kind of stuff, but no other like STEMs. They're not involved yet because really the team for our symposium committee is me and one other person. For the symposium committee here, it's like, I don't know, 17 faculty members or something, which is insane. Super cool. But yeah, we'll go back a couple slides. These were pictures from the year that I was advising. Those are our students from Psi Beta that won the first author award last year, not last year, 2 years ago. That's Ellie and I can't remember the other student's name. I can't remember the other student's name.
I could never remember the name.
That's okay. Ellie mattered though.
It's on the poster. It's on the poster.
Yeah, it's on the poster somewhere, and then
Guess I didn't work with us as much. Like Ellie, we met with Ellie on a regular basis.
yeah, and Ellie was in my experimental methods class, so I knew her. I don't know where she's at, but I'm assuming she's doing amazing things.
I think she said she was going to. I think she said she was like Irvine.
Okay, yeah, go work. And then those are my 2 other students right there. That's Andrea and that's Anne. Andrea and Anne were part of the UX UI Design Club, or currently I think it's now called Design Club if it's still running. So Ellie's project was the national research project from Psi Beta. That one was factors related to why people believe in psychological myths. Super cool project. And then our project over here with Andrea and Anne was them creating an app to help students at OCC develop better study habits. So it was super cool. Anne's now at San Diego, UC San Diego, in cognitive psychology. And then Andrea is an art student, so she's currently, but she wants to go into like user UX and UI design. So she's currently at UC Davis doing that. And she told me recently she got a scholarship thanks to my rec letter, so I was like super hyped for that question. Yeah, that is Antran. Very cool.
She's my little sister's like best friend. She was over. I just saw the photo and I realized
That's so small world, yeah.
I was like, wait, she goes to me with it.
Yeah, she was my student. She had me for experimental methods, and both Anne and Andrea had me for psychology of learning. So very proud of them. And then even prouder is because, oh yeah, I didn't write it on the OCC slide, but I was also the advisor for the UX UI Design Club. So I was their advisor for that club. And I gave them a reward for them winning second place with the oral presentation, which was the UX UI Design Club got to design one of my tattoos. And it's this tattoo, which is my motto that I say at the end of all my classes, which is do good science, be good people, and it's right here. So super happy with them, super proud of them. We went through a number of different other designs before that. And I'll leave it up to your imagination what weird stuff they came up with. And yeah, that's basically like all the stuff about me. So I don't want to stay forever talk about myself, unless you like want to hear me talk about myself, which I'm pretty like good at yapping, so yeah, just let me do that. That's like what I'm paid to do. Okay, yeah, so questions and stuff you want to ask? Yeah. Oh, we'll do yours after.
I'm curious, was it always your goal to teach or?
Yeah, so good question. Originally when I was at UCI and I was doing my psychology degree, I thought I wanted to work in clinical work, be a therapist. And then during that time, this is gonna sound really like turbo nerd. I really liked calculus. So I was like tutoring my friends in my first year dorm on like calculus. And I was like, wow, this is like kind of fun. And then I thought, wow, maybe I should be like a math teacher. Ooh, exciting, wow. And that's when I found out that UCI was gonna have an education science major. They didn't have it before. So it was a very new major. I started taking it as a minor and then they were like, oh yeah, it's a major now. I was like, oh, okay. I'll just declare that I'm gonna take this as a major as well. And originally I was gonna just be like a math teacher. But then stuff happened. I got into like a research lab at UCI. It was a cognitive development research lab. So I was working with a professor named Barbara Sarnecka at UCI. And she had an NSF project National Science Foundation project, where she had research assistants go into little preschools with kids, and we would teach them how to count. So we had little books, and we would teach all the kids how to count. Then we would teach them rhymes, teach them songs, teach them how to count. Really fun. And I thought, wow, research kind of cool. But I still like math, so what do I do? And it was from there that I was like, oh, I guess I'm just gonna like Frankenstein these two things together. And that's how I got to that mathematical cognition, into that research area. But like deep in my mind, I was like, I still want to teach people about stuff. But now it's not necessarily teaching people about math, but teaching people about how people think about math and how math works. For the normal person, how they think about it. Like why fractions are so hard, or like how do people do long division and that kind of stuff. So it was really cool. So basically, long story short, for TLDR, I didn't always want to be a professor, but I knew I always wanted to teach. But then when I went to grad school, that's when I was like, oh, actually, I do want to turn this into like professional like teaching career where I teach undergraduates. Yeah, that's basically how I got there. You had a question?
Yeah, so I know you said that like you don't have to be your PhD degree. So for you, you said that like, or like just like me a question is like, is it pretty competitive if you were to apply for like a gig as like professor or assistant without your PhD? Like, is it competitive rate like more money?
Okay, so I have two different answers for you. So depending on the type of institution you are trying to get a job at, if it's a community college, the qualifications you need, the bare minimum, is actually a master's in the discipline that you want to teach in. I actually still don't have that, so I have to apply for something called equivalency. But at minimum, you need like a master's degree to teach at like community college, whether that is part-time or full-time. So we have a couple of different people within our department right now, and our department's like massive, and they have at highest a master's, but they teach full-time. However, their pay scale is separate from a PhD's pay scale. So they earn actually less than we do, even though we have the same position, because their education level isn't the same. Their training isn't the same, not equivalent. At a research institution or at a CSU, so a state college or like a or an R1, they basically only want you to have like some kind of doctorate level degree. And the type of job that you have at like UCI, UCSD, or like Davis or something is different from what you would have teaching at a community college. And the main difference is at a community college, you're basically just doing teaching and like service work. You're just like advising for clubs or helping out with school with like certain activities and stuff. But if you're at like a UC and a research institution, it's research. All the money comes from research. So you got to publish, publish, publish. and you gotta be really good at it, or really good at getting grants, so that money goes into the school. And like at Cal State, typically people are gonna have doctorate level degrees. I imagine you could still have a full-time with a master's, but I think it's generally preferred people have doctorates. And theirs is a bit more evenly mixed between doing research and teaching. But like at the extreme ends, UCs and research universities, they don't care as much about teaching, and their job doesn't depend on it. Their jobs depend on research. And then community college, your job more or less depends on your teaching. And then CSUs are somewhere like in the middle.
And we went to Psi Beta, went to a thing called Psi Beta Day at UCSD last spring. It was kind of interesting, like, there's even different types at UC schools, there's even different types of teaching or, you know, positions, right? So there was one, it was interesting, they had 2 PhDs, a PsyD, I don't know if the other one was just, the fourth one was just a master's, I can't even remember what she was. But there was one woman with her PhD who, when she got hired on what they call soft money. So she didn't have a salary, all of her money came from grants, and she didn't have grants, and she might have had a little bit of money.
Yeah.
A small salary, and so she was very jaded. She was basically, don't ever do that. And so, because she was, you know, getting grants can be difficult, doing research and getting published and all that. And then the other one was much more satisfied with her job, and she was full-time professor, researcher, and she didn't have soft money, so her salary didn't depend on grant money. Sometimes it can supplement if you're doing research at a research university, the grant money will supplement your salary, so it's like kind of a bonus. That's all. There's all sorts of different dynamics.
I have a cool scavenger hunt for everybody to try out later. It's called Transparent California. If you've never heard of Transparent California, it is a website. It is a public government website that you can use to look at the salaries of all government workers in California, which includes educators and presidents of colleges and every known like staff member. You can find out what someone's salary looks like. So if you want to like explore around, see what it looks like specifically within California, totally get. And it's public knowledge because we get paid by the state government, more or less.
How come you went like from your bachelor's to getting a PhD
Instead of a master's? Oh, because I can.
I didn't even know that was like an option.
Yeah. So a lot of PhD programs, you'll see them. They require you to like have a master's before you apply, but not every program has that. So I applied for a lot of PhD programs where there was no master's requirement, so I can get straight in. That's what I did.
Was that just like UCI offered that, or did it depend on like what you wanted to get your PhD in?
Both. So most of the UCs, you actually could go from bachelor's to a PhD, because if you're coming from a UC, it's a research institution, so they assume already that whoever's applying has research experience that they can take with them to the graduate program. Other ones though that I've looked at out of state, because I was applying out of state as well, they required a master's degree. So it just kind of depends. But I wanted one where I could just get it right away. I didn't want to have to go through an extra 2 years before I could get a PhD. However, I will say that for my PhD program, finishing the first 2 years guaranteed the master's. So I could earn the master's as part of the PhD, and I would have the degree. And all I would have had to have done was, after I finished my coursework for those first 2 years, I just applied and put my stuff on like a piece of paper and they would give it to me. But I was kind of lazy. I was like, well, I could just like do this for like 3 more years and then I get the PhD instead, and I get to wear a funny hat. So, and I really wanted to wear the funny hat. So that's what I did. And if you don't know what the funny hat is, just look up the doctoral hat. It's like this cool octagonal like beret thing. It's great. I was so hyped when I got to wear it. Oh, and when it comes to PhD programs, they have different levels of funding, which means that some PhD programs are kind of similar to like an undergraduate program where you have to like pay, you have financial aid in order for like your tuition and stuff. But some PhD programs are fully funded, meaning when you apply and get in, you never pay tuition. So they pay for you to be in school. and they literally give you a job, which is usually you TA, you're a teaching assistant, or you do research work for a professor, and you get paid that way. You still have to pay rent for wherever you're living, but you never pay tuition for the entirety of the time you're there, assuming your program funds you for like 5 or like 4 years or something like that. So UCI was fully funded, so I never paid tuition.
And you have stipend, right?
And I had a stipend from being a TA and from being a graduate student researcher. Yes, question in the back.
Is it to get into grad school? if you go the same university?
That's a good question. So yes and no. It kind of depends on the school. There are advantages to apply to the same school for graduate school because you'll know more people who can vouch for you, and that usually gets pretty far. And that's how I got in, basically, because I didn't get into like other PhD programs. I almost got into a Berkeley one, but I bombed the interview, so I didn't make it. It's okay. The interview process for me getting into the PhD program at UCI was my potential advisor. He called me for about 10 minutes. He was like, hey, Ed, I saw your application. Do you still want to do math research? And I was like, yeah, Drew, I kind of do want to still do math research. And then he was like, cool, I'll call you back in like 2 weeks. He calls me back in about 2 weeks, wakes me up, and then goes, hey, Ed, you're in. And I go, nice. It doesn't normally happen that way, but that's how it happened for me.
So for your bachelor's, like that wasn't funded because, well, I mean, like the PhD programs, some of them are funded as well, the funding we get for research.
Yes.
Which then like that's where you didn't have to pay tuition
Yeah.
during PhD.
Yes.
So then under undergrad,
I did have to pay, and I had financial aid.
okay,
Yeah.
because of financial aid, but not because of like, they didn't pay your tuition for undergrad or.
So tuition, I had to get financial aid, Pell Grant, that kind of stuff, in order to afford that tuition for those 4 years
For the bachelor.
for the bachelor's. But for the PhD, I didn't need it. I just had the fully funded program. So yeah.
Was it hard to become a TA to get the funding or to get your education paid for the PhD?
No. So basically, when you're in the PhD, they're like, hey, you need to do something besides like taking your classes. So they basically force all of us to either work as a graduate student researcher or as a TA in order to make a stipend. That way we could afford to pay for our rent and live.
But what is bombing like an interview? Like,
Oh, good question. So the interview questions that I remember that I definitely bombed, they asked me like what kind of research I wanted to do with them. And at that time, usually the way you answer that question is you have to align your interests with whoever your potential advisor might be. And you have to show them that you have like some idea of what you want to do, like some clear idea of what kind of research you want to do. That usually gets you pretty far. And in that very moment, I did not have that with that advisor that I wanted to work with, which was okay. For my other advisor, the one who called me for about 10 minutes, I did. So with him, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and he had interests that were very much aligned with mine. So it was a very like match made in heaven kind of thing. But I still spent like the first year or two of my PhD, like not super knowing if what I was doing was like working or if it was like good or anything like that. So it was just a lot of trial and error still. Like even if I had some idea of what I wanted, it wasn't the clearest idea, and he worked with me to make it clear. So I owe a lot of my success to like my advisor at that time.
and maybe like, I don't know if you mentioned your dissertation, like.
Oh, yeah.
We can condense it or not.
Oh yeah, does everybody know what that dissertation is, or some like vague idea what it is?
I mean, yours.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly describe what in general it is, and then what mine was about. So like a dissertation is like this big paper that you usually write up to like summarize all the research that you did during your PhD program. Mine was like 3 chapters long, so it ended up being about like 150 pages. Sounds like a lot, but that was over the course of like 5 years working on it. So wasn't that much, all things considered, considering like most of what you do in the PhD program, it's research anyway. So like that was just like easy, finish this like first or second year, already have like 50 of those pages done. And it kind of gets, you just kind of keep pegging away at it all the way through the end. My dissertation was on dual tasking. Dual tasking is the true form of multitasking. Multitasking is a myth. Don't believe in that. Well, okay, not entirely a myth. There are some processes and actions you can do that are simultaneous. People can very much walk and talk at the same time. That's very easy. That is multitasking. But the multitasking that people usually think of is like, oh, I can listen to music while I study, or let me watch this episode of this new K-drama that I'm seeing also while I'm studying. And they're like, yeah, I can do both at the same time. You can't. Because what you're really doing is you're switching between the two tasks. You're switching between one and the other. Your attention has to work harder for you to go and focus on one thing and then switching over to focus on this other thing. And that amount of cognitive effort that it takes for you to do that actually causes you to, one, not remember as much, and two, take longer to study and watch the show. So you end up doing worse on both of those tasks by trying to do them at the same time. So my dissertation was on that, but more related to like how people do math.
Dual tasking.
Yeah.
How is it different from multitasking?
Oh, so multitasking is just the word that I use to describe it to people who don't know what dual tasking is, because people are more familiar with multitasking.
Okay.
But I describe it as dual tasking
Okay.
because it's really switching between two tasks at the same time. Yeah. Good. Other question? Yes.
Like you mentioned, I mean, I don't really understand, much about like PhD programs.
Yeah, that's okay. Not a lot of people do. I didn't know anything.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine. That's whatever. There are no dumb questions when it comes to this because academia is like this weird nebulous like thing that people just like, yeah, PhD.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, surely.
Yeah, no. But yeah, like I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. A lot of people don't know what they get themselves into when you go for a PhD.
Yes, because I think you mentioned there's multiple programs at UCI, or is it like one?
Do you mean like multiple PhD programs? Because you can get a PhD in like a lot of different things.
Like, so it's like you can kind of choose like whatever, like, kind of like a major, but it's a PhD.
Yeah. So I got mine in education, which is not psychology, but I can spin my research interests into psychology land, more or
Right,
less.
yeah.
Because I worked with like the cog psych department. All my stuff was like experimental psychology work, which is very different from the rest of my department, because I was just really into memory. But it was fine. They still accepted all my stuff for education. Because a lot of the people within my department were also like really into math, and they were really into like the cognitive psychology behind math. So it lined up perfectly fine. But people can go into lots of different, they can have whatever interest they want within the PhD that they're doing. So someone might go into a psych PhD, but someone might be more interested in like motivation and emotion. Somebody might be more interested in like false eyewitness testimonies. Some people might be interested in more like the clinical aspect, but they're all under a psych PhD. Yeah. It just kind of depends on your interest and who your advisor is, because usually your advisor is one to tell you. Yeah.
Does every PhD have a dissertation?
Yes. Basically. Yeah.
Is it usually like, pages or does it just kind of depend?
It varies. You're probably not going to find a good dissertation under 100. Some people are kind of insane, so they write like way more than that. I don't know, Melissa, how long is yours?
I want to say it was about 152.
Yeah, I think that's like on average about how long they would be, because that is about the length of like 3 research papers that you would have written. But some people, I don't know, they just like writing, and they're very verbose, so that means they like to use a lot of words. So they might have like a 300-page dissertation, and it's like impossible to read, so none of us would want to read it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you gotta think like you're doing, like if you're taking methods, like you're gonna do like probably, in the end, you'll have a 20-page paper. But your literature review is 4 to 6 articles, right? Well, when you do your dissertation, you have 50 to 100 articles, and you've read them all, you understand them all, and you described them all, it's like in a more concise way than I do in my classes, but it's a lot of background information, right? So you have like the whole first part of it, so just tons of background, like, and that's part of you learning about the topic too, right? Is you're reading all these articles, you're learning about it, you're writing about it, and then you do the research.
Yeah.
And like you said, you have several different research projects. And it's different for everybody, you had participants he collected data on, I did animal research, but a lot of psychology research too is data mining, where you actually have a data set that's already been collected, and you're just
Yeah.
going through it and coming up with new hypotheses or using it in a certain way. There's so many different things that
Yeah.
like,
A lot of people do like developmental research, so people who study like development, lifespan, they can't use their own data, so they have to rely on longitudinal data sets that have been collected over like decades. And they try to do research on those things. So they do secondary data analysis, but that's totally valid, right? It's just, you're still doing research and it's good research.
we're talking about the PhD in terms of like the research aspect, but some people do go to the psychology PhD program to go on and be a clinician.
Yeah.
So, and that's like, we'll have different speakers throughout, like, so we have a PsyD coming already.
Yeah.
We have, the undergrad who's at UCI who's applying to clinical, I think they're clinical PhD programs right now. So that, again, like, kind of like keep coming, get all these different perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Like learn more and more about the different pathways and options you have.
Yeah, and you don't even have to like stay in academia. So the picture that we've been painting so far is that you get the PhD or you get your graduate degree, and you go into academia and be a professor or a researcher or something. You don't have to do that. You can actually just go work wherever. Some people, they go into like a cog site PhD, and then because we learn lots and lots of statistics when we go into our grad programs, instead of staying within the realm of psychology, they just go into like data analysis. They just become like data analysts or data scientists, and they get paid like big bucks. But then you're like a corporate slave. Okay. Don't worry, we're still slaves to our institution as well. That never stops. But yeah, there's a lot of other options. Like you can still work within like a tech industry. Some people, they go into psych PhD, and then afterwards they work for a gaming company. Yeah.
Why do you choose to teach economics?
Because I like teaching. On my Discord, my little like status says professional gabbler. So I like talking. I used to not. Like public speaking used to be very like debilitating and anxiety inducing. Like I remember having to do presentations in like middle school and like my first year of college. I hated it. It's a really awful experience. Then I like kept doing it, and I was like, all right, I guess I kind of like it. This is kind of fun because I get to like hold everybody hostage and talk to them for like hours at a time. I think I force them to do like weird activities that I make them do in classes. So I enjoy it. It's very fun, and it's very rewarding to see my students pick up on new information and go, oh, that's neat. That's a really, really nice question.
So I'm curious, like, into our teaching now, what would you say is the most rewarding part of teaching? And also, maybe like some challenges that are difficult to navigate through?
Yeah. So the most rewarding part of the teaching experience is just, actually, I'll tell you the moment that was the most rewarding. It was last year. It was graduation time, and it was seeing my students walk down like the field or the track, getting ready to like receive their diplomas at the stage. And I got to like dap them up, got to high five a lot of them, got to hug a lot of my students. I saw a lot of my students succeed. Students who came from a lot of different backgrounds, some of which were a lot more tumultuous than others, and just seeing them make it across that stage, get their AA, and hopefully see them go do something cool beyond. That's what I'm looking for. The challenging part is getting them there, because you have some students who are really awesome, and they like want to succeed. You can help them succeed. You do everything you can, and you're like, dude, you are set. But then you have some students who really want to get there, but there are so many other things that are fighting against them, getting them there. And there's sometimes you just can't do anything about it. So that's the hardest part, right? It's just like coming to terms with there's some things I can't do for my students, and there's just some things that either the college has to do for them or they have to figure out themselves if they want to be successful, that I just have no control over. And that's coming to terms with that over the next like few decades that I have this career that I'm trying to like live with.
Yeah.
I don't want to take up too much time. Do you guys have other like side beta business? Okay, then I can keep yapping. Go.
A real quick question. I know you mentioned like a PhD that isn't like research oriented.
Yeah.
And then I'm wondering if like those would get the same like funding where you don't have to pay tuition.
Okay, so all PhDs, you have to do research.
Yeah.
So that's for sure. Not every program is fully funded. Some programs are like partially funded, so they might fund like maybe the first couple years of your PhD, but then you have to pay for the rest, which can get quite expensive. But generally you come out of PhD with, everybody should come out of PhD with research experience, because that's what a PhD does. It trains you to be like a really hardcore researcher and usually some expert in a very hyper specific niche area like that, that you should know a lot about, but you shouldn't know everything about. There's no expectation that you know everything about it. And then those general skills you can take with you from the PhD program to different kinds of like occupations that you want. Could be working at a gaming studio, could be working at like one of those like think tank kind of places, could be working at nonprofits, academia for sure. All of them are totally valid as long as you're able to adapt and make yourself flexible to show people how the skills that you've acquired through your training can be applied to those specific jobs. Then you're pretty much like good to go.
And so non-research would be like a PsyD or a master's,
Yeah.
where you come out with like a license, like you take a license and that, there's different kinds of masters too, but like an LBCC or
LMFT.
another,
Yeah.
LMFT, and then there's another acronym too.
Dissertations for studies.
No, PsyDs don't do, they do typically a literature review, and so PsyDs focus more on the clinical, like
Practical
clinical and practical aspects and have practicums and stuff. PhD, clinical PhD program in psychology come out, you're prepared to be a clinician, but you also have research experience. So it's a little bit more, you have more options with a PhD than you do a PsyD. In my understanding of PsyD programs, there's no fully funded psych, because there's no research to fund those programs, so you come out of a PsyD program or master's program with whatever debt you paid.
Yeah.
paid into it.
And no. Okay, so for PsyD and PhD, they're roughly about the same because they're doctorates. For a master's, it's usually like 2 years. Yeah, 2 years.
And I'll say, so we had a guest speaker a couple of years ago that came, she had a PhD, I knew her, I didn't really know the whole story. And so she made some bad choices. She went to private undergraduate, she went to USC for undergrad, then she did a master's, I think at Pepperdine, and then she did a PhD at another private school, so none of that was fully funded. So she paid for all of that. And, so she's probably now been working, I don't know, at least 20 years, maybe not, and she's still, so she's a friend of a friend, and her friend says she's still paying off her.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and she's a clinical psychologist with her, I think she has her own private practice. But so she, when she came to talk, I was like, I knew you were a clinical PhD, and I knew she worked, she had some cool background stuff, but I was like, oh, I didn't know you. I did all that. It wasn't the best thing to throw it to, kind of like having spirit for students, but because there are places where you can get, whether it's a clinical PhD and you can, come out without debt, or PsyDs you can come out with debt. There are programs I think that are longer, that allow you to do it night school work and things like that, so.
It's cheaper when you stay at the same school and continue your master's in your.
So I did my master's at San Diego State, but I chose to do a master's because I kind of decided I wanted to change directions. And so it was, my parents paid for my undergraduate, and then I paid for my master's. I did not want to pay for my master's. So it wasn't any cheaper. Some master's programs are even more expensive though than a bachelor's degree. So like my sister-in-law is doing a counseling master's degree, and maybe you can go to private school too, but it's a lot, I forget how much, but it's a lot more than like regular, like graduate or certain master's degree. So you have to be careful where you're applying and what your limits are, and
Yeah. When you're thinking about applying to a graduate degree later, really kind of scope out the area that you would potentially be living in. Because that's where all your money's gonna go. Like, you think their tuition is what's gonna kill you? Nah, it's like the living expenses itself. So like, choose where you wanna live very wisely for your graduate degree. Now, there are some like online graduate degrees that get offered. I think there is. So just like, be careful picking those out, because some of those graduate programs, like, yeah, you come out of it with like a doctorate degree, but it may not be a very good doctorate degree. May not get the best training out of it. And I would like for everybody to like receive the best possible training they can for the things that they want to be. For the price that matters. Yeah, part that works. Sorry. Cool. Well, it's like 3:30. I don't know if you guys got other questions you want to ask me. I may have answers to them. Yeah.
Like kind of academia, I guess, but did you ever do any research with cognition and like learning disabilities or any?
I wanted to, but it's very hard to get that population of people.
Yeah.
So originally I came in and I was very interested in mathematical cognition, but the thing that I was interested with at first, before I got into all this like multitasking stuff, was actually this learning disability called dyscalculia. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of dyscalculia. If you've never heard of it before, think dyslexia, but math. So like this is where kids will look at a number, like they'll see a number 5, and like look around you right now, and like see if you can count 5 of something. Look around you can count 5 of something pretty easily, right? I can show the number 5 to somebody with dyscalculia, and they'll have no idea what it means. They cannot quantify values. Numbers make no sense to them. So like, imagine trying to pay for something at like the grocery store. I want to buy this apple. They tell me this apple costs like 50 cents. I don't know, it might cost $1 with inflation, who knows? You see an apple, it costs 50 cents. Kid or adult, right? Adult will look through their pockets, see what money they have. They'll go, I don't know what 50 cents is. They could stare at it. They'll know like this, they'll know this is a dollar bill, but they don't know how much it's worth. They don't know how much of it they need to pay because someone just told them 50 cents. Now you're thinking about it, you're like, I know what 50 cents is. There's no way for me to like not know what 50 cents is. That's what makes it so difficult for us to understand like people with dyscalculia. It's because their understanding of a number is so vastly different from what we understand a number to be like. So that's like a learning disability that is also very rare. More rare than dyslexia, which also makes it more difficult to research.
I was diagnosed with dyslexia.
Yeah.
I'm always, now that I'm in school again, like I'm sort of wondering, oh my God, like I thought this is the way everybody was.
Nah.
I'm realizing it's not. I put all this stuff backwards, but
Unfortunately, not too much, but yeah. But actually, if you have dyslexia and you say you do, the research and kind of interventions they have for people with dyslexia is so like advanced at this stage that a lot of things can work for people with dyslexia. There's a lot of good support for that specific learning disability. However, for someone who has dyscalculia, they're a little out of luck because the research is a lot more behind. So we don't know the best ways to help people with dyscalculia. And then the saying or joke that we have around for dyscalculia and for math research in general is that it's 20 years behind reading research. So we're fighting, it's like an uphill battle, but it's kind of fun. Yeah. Cool. Other stuff? Sick. You guys want to close this off? Oh, sorry. Yeah, whatever you want. Finish off.
Thank you so much for talking, Dr. Chen.
Yeah.
Just a couple reminders before we adjourn the meeting. The next formal chapter meeting is going to be on the 9th. But next week, we're going to have the science night run through, same time, same place here. And then science night will be next Friday, 5 to 8. I think that's all. Are there any questions about anything? You can leave in the chat if you have questions on Zoom as well. Okay, awesome. All right, we'll adjourn the meeting at 3:34. Thank you everyone for coming.
And on the Zoom.